We begin tonight with Mark Halperin, host of Two Way, former longtime political director at ABC News, author of Game Change and Double Down, which is what drew me into political reporting. And I want to start with that, Mark, because of your long, deep knowledge of politics and the coverage of it, 30-plus years in terms of experience. Have you ever seen a president with such a stranglehold on his party?
No, there's never been anyone who's had this stranglehold, and it derives from the fact that we haven't seen too many presidents in the modern American history who've led movements. And one of the things I tell my friends who don't like Donald Trump at all is you have to understand he's leading a movement. You may not agree with him, you may not like him, but that is a special political power. And what gives him this power, many things, but the most sort of hardball and top of mind for so many of these Republicans is if Donald Trump endorses someone in a Republican primary, they're almost certain to win. And that means that he can get them kicked out of their jobs if he chooses to, and they're all very well aware of it.
The message we are hearing is that as members of Congress go home, which they are, for the 2-week recess around Easter, because members of Congress don't exactly spend a lot of time in Washington. It's a good gig. Much is being made about the reception they are getting at their town halls. Take a listen.
Trump's not obeying the Supreme Court. He just ignores them.
What are you going to do about it? These people have been sentenced to life imprisonment in a foreign country with no due process.
How about the KKK? All inside the interior of the United States. You can head out. The protest is outside. Thank you very much. Protest is outside.
This is being made out to be some sort of watershed change in America and a turn against Trump. I don't quite see it that way.
Well, the sample space is small. First of all, I say this about town halls involving protests or fierce questions from either side. You never know, right? You need to know, who are those people? Why are they there? There's no doubt, if you look at the crowd size that Bernie Sanders and AOC are drawing, that there is energy on the left. There is anger at Congress, members of both parties. But the question is, to what end? It's an expression of unhappiness on the part of tens of millions of Americans. But there are tens of millions of Americans who are pretty happy with the way Donald Trump is trying to shake things up. So there's no election around the corner. We should pay attention to what people are unhappy about, but will it slow down the reconciliation bill that the Republicans are trying to pass? Will it slow down Donald Trump's march on DOJ or anything else? I don't think so, but attention must be paid. Tens of millions of people are unhappy, tens of millions are not.
There is now sort of news of a split inside the Republican Party a little bit. Republicans warn Johnson over Medicaid. Dozens swing district and centrist House Republicans are warning Speaker Mike Johnson they won't vote for a budget reconciliation package that cuts Medicaid too deeply. There is another part of House Republicans that are talking about raising taxes on the rich. The Republican Party has wildly changed its values to align with Donald Trump. The Heritage Foundation, Club for Growth, these really conservative organizations have now become divisions of MAGA Inc. by abandoning their principles. Can Donald Trump sort of drive this ship wherever he wants it to go?
Well, I think there's distractions, even if they're undergirded by important constitutional or policy issues. And then there's what I call big casino, the issues that will define what America's like in a broad way, and which will define Donald Trump's legacy. And one of those is questions of taxes and spending. If you took every Republican who said, I won't vote for X or I won't vote for Y, they can't pass this bill. But what they're going to do is what they've been doing, which is to say, there's more that unites us than divides us. And if we don't pass the president's major spending bill and tax cut bill, the country and the party will both be ruined. So it's I think important not to get caught up in the day-to-day threats of certain members or certain factions to say this is a bottom line, because currently there are bottom lines out there that are not reconcilable. But I believe in the end, before too long, not in the end, before too long, you'll see 85 to 95% of Republicans on board, and then they'll have to herd those final group of cats. But it's not nearly as dire as those bottom line ultimatums might make it seem.
That makes perfect sense. An unstoppable force is time. The immovable object is the midterms next year. And Donald Trump is now talking about when a timeline for his big deals on tariffs, even with China, before the middle of summer. Take a listen.
Do you want to talk directly to President Xi?
I don't want to say that. No. It's just not appropriate. I think we have a lot of time. I think we have plenty of time. I would think over the next 3 or 4 weeks, I think maybe the whole thing could be concluded.
Is he getting, and I said this in my open, a little bit nervous about the economy, even if he doesn't want to say it?
I think his team is a little bit nervous, and in some cases, a lot more than a little bit nervous. It's extraordinary the degree to which people in finance, some members of Congress of both parties, some foreign leaders, some experienced economists who aren't partisan, believe the die is already cast, that he's actually destroyed the American economy and seriously hurt the world economy. So they can't escape that sound. You and I hear it every day. Our inbox is filled, our Twitter feeds filled with serious people making statements that seem extraordinary on one level. So there is concern. They do hope that some of the other things coming up as they manage the tariff process, they strike some of these bilateral deals. They pass the tax and spending cut bill. They do DOGE in a way that inspires people to believe in the economy. They maybe make peace deals with Iran, with in Ukraine, with Ukraine and Russia, with the Middle East. They're trying to do other big things that will be countervailing to whatever drag the tariffs are causing. And of course, again, if they do strike a bunch of bilateral deals, that will get not just the markets excited and calmed, but the real world economy can move to a better place. So I judge them by their results, not by the president's often contradictory rhetoric. And we'll see where we are by Christmas. The midterms are more than a year away. And I think it's tempting to make that where you put your stopwatch. But I think more about where are we at Christmas of this year, where there's plenty the president can accomplish that would be positive for the American economy.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right, as you normally are.
It happens sometimes.
Yes, to say that the point of judgment is much sooner than the midterms. And that gets me to my final point here, which is that you have been able to look out and sort of see the world as it is, which few political reporters have. But the enormous power of Donald Trump comes from winning. It comes from his stranglehold on the Republican Party and on working class voters. Maybe it happens the other way around. Especially a place like Iowa, we are now seeing Democrats come up with that same Donald Trump-esque populist working class message. Here's a Democrat who just threw his hat in to run against Joni Ernst for the Senate. Take a listen.
Only 2% of Congress come from the working class. We built the damn table. It's time we had a seat at it. I'm fighting for a Democratic Party that people like me will actually want to be a part of. People like my dad, myself, my kids, all the people like us. The DC elites, the ruling class, they don't want me, but I think maybe you will.
Can Trump's message be stolen?
I think that video, as compelling as it is as a piece of poetry, speaks to why it's going to be challenging for people like that to steal his message. You didn't hear a single specific policy idea. Now, Donald Trump is not the most rigorous person ever to run for president or be president on policy, but he had specific ideas about things he wanted to do. I didn't hear that guy say anything specific. So it's easy to say we're populists, we're outsiders, Washington's horrible, but then you got to say some specific things you would do that's different. And I think it's one of the big missing pieces for all the wings of the Democratic Party now. What are they for that's popular? Trump is for saying some things like the tariffs that are not universally popular, but he's for a lot of popular stuff. And populist is great. You also have to be, as we say, popular.
Lesson in grammar as well. Mark, it's always good to see you. Thank you, my friend. We'll check you out on Two-Way in the morning meeting.
Thanks for having me on, buddy.
Tomorrow
Good to see
morning.
you.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.